Dear listeners, I'm thrilled to announce you can now pre-order the paperback edition of our book, Think Like a Vegan. This highly anticipated release will be available in the UK and worldwide from January 2025 and in North America from April 2025. It'll contain a new afterword, so you can dive into updates and new material you won't find in the hardcover. Don't miss out on this opportunity to enhance your understanding and commitment to veganism. Pre-order your copy today wherever you buy books or on Amazon or Target, and join us in thinking, living, and thriving like a vegan.
This is another iRaw podcast.
Hi. I'm Emilia Leese, and welcome to the final episode of Season 3 of Think Like a Vegan podcast. It's been a terrific season of challenging topics and remarkable guests. Today, I want to go back to basics a little bit. We hear about animal rights, welfare, compassion, and kindness. It all sounds like good things and stuff we should have. So I want to share with you why, when I talk about animal ethics, I center my words around rights instead of welfare or compassion and kindness. And there's lots of academic and philosophical writing on what is a right. I promise I won't go and get complicated on you because this isn't particle physics. Rights are basic things we all inherently have by virtue of being alive, and which we're owed if they're unrecognized. So if you think about rights along the lines of basic fairness, you'll be able to pretty much figure it out. And what's basic fairness? That means treating people the same unless there's a morally relevant reason to treat them differently. Sexism, racism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, and so on, all those prejudices get in the way of equal treatment and often result in those who have power failing to apply basic fairness to those with less or no power. The differences between people in terms of sex, gender, race, ability, sexual orientation, religion, and so on are not morally relevant differences. They're only external differences. Underneath those, we are all the same. And we all have the same basic or fundamental rights. By equal treatment, I mean, what ethics, rules, and laws are we going to apply which affect what we're able to do in society, how we're able to live our lives, work, love, associate, travel, and whatever else whilst living free from exploitation. That last one, living free from exploitation, that's the single most important basic right. Because without it, all the others won't matter. Basic fairness, equal treatment, and rights have little to nothing to do with compassion or kindness. Don't misunderstand me. Compassion and kindness are essential. They're important and good things, for sure. But they're not compulsory, like a right. No one owes you kindness or compassion, but society owes you your rights. Kindness and compassion make life for everyone a lot better. But I don't care whether someone is nice, kind, or compassionate towards me if I don't have the right to live out my life in the same basic way as they do. And as a friend recently said, recognize my right over being kind or compassionate to me any day. So what do rights and basic fairness have to do with non-human animals? Everything. All animals have needs, wants, fears, abilities, intelligence, skills, social habits, and emotions, which they demonstrate in ways like and different from people. Despite our differences, the most important thing people and animals have in common is sentience. Sentience binds us together morally. Yet, we ignore that because it's convenient to carry on with our distorted relationship to animals. So what's sentience, you ask? For that term to have a universally meaningful value, we must recognize sentience broadly. Sentience is a means to the end of continued existence, as the philosopher Gary Francione writes. And each of us is experiencing the subject of a life, a conscious creature having an individual welfare that has important to us whatever our usefulness to others, as the ethicist Tom Regan writes. Sentience isn't whether an animal has intelligence or imagination, or is able to do some activity based on what people can do. And mind you, I'll also accept the criticism that sentience shouldn't be the baseline standard, as Manisha Dekka explains in her work and talked about in season 1 of this podcast. Her standard, beingness, is a brilliant evolution of how we can imagine and create a new paradigm of society and relationships among the entirety of the living world. But for now, I'll use sentience as the most basic standard. And it's the shared sentience which obligates us to recognize we owe animals the same moral treatment as we owe to people, unless there's a morally relevant reason to justify treating animals differently. And here is where this whole discussion comes to a head. Let's take a short break before getting into it. This is On the Forbidden Balcony by Matthew Gerstenberger, aka Seismicity on SoundCloud. This piece has field recordings of many familiar sounds to Matthew that he's heard over the years during his stays in Tokyo. Woven through it is a really impressive thunderstorm that moved across the city one autumn evening. Animal rights aren't about how we allow them to live whilst in cages, or at what age they can be slaughtered, or even how we are allowed to do all these things, because those aren't rights actually belonging to them. All those rules spell out what we can do to them as their owners. Their welfare isn't created for them, but it's more for us and what we're willing to tolerate in our society. Sure, laws addressing how we treat them will affect their lives and lessen their suffering. Less suffering is unquestionably better than more suffering. But it will not stop their suffering, exploitation, or slaughter. All animals, and you've heard me say this before, whether domesticated or wild, are owned, either by people, companies, or the state. And that's the case all over the world, no exceptions. Animals are owned like we own our phones, which means, like your phone, they've got zero rights. And when we talk about animal welfare, we've already accepted we're allowed to use them. We've jumped right over the step asking if we should be using them in the first place. And instead, we've gone directly to how we can use them. Applying basic fairness means we cannot morally use animals as objects. Full stop. That principle applies to us and them, with no exception. So, not out of compassion, kindness, or because it's better to treat them better while we exploit them, but because it's our moral obligation to recognize their fundamental right of not being an object. At the core, welfarism is an expedient compromise I'm unwilling to make on behalf of animals. And whilst I generally stay out of welfarist campaigns, there are many committed and well-intentioned people for whom those are deeply important battles and for which they have made great personal sacrifice. Veganism, just like all major political and social movements, needs everyone doing everything. I'd just like to see a stronger focus and engagement with the radical recognition of animals' fundamental rights.
We burn things up when we go around. We speed things up when we go around.
That's it from me, Emi Leese. Thank you for listening. Remember, you can get in touch by email at thinklikeaveganbook@gmail.com. You can find more of my work and upcoming events on my website, emilialeese.com, and social media. Subscribe to this podcast, share it with others, and leave us a review. And buy a copy of Think Like a Vegan anywhere you buy books and audiobooks, or request it from your local library. Production credit goes to Jim Moore of Bloody Vegans Productions. Theme music provided by Jenny Moore's Mystic Business from the eponymous album. The opening tune is Flashbacks, and we close with Tear Things Up. The interval music is by Matthew Gerstenberger, aka Seismicity, on SoundCloud.
For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.